Hello, and welcome to a live conversation to kick off Mental Health Awareness Month. A bit of a mouthful, but I got it out. So I'm Deanna. I'm with the Go Deck, and I'm joined by my good friend, Kim McKewon. I'll tell you very quickly about me and the Go Deck, and then I'm going to have Kim introduce herself. So the Go Deck is a card deck featuring 52 outdoor locations where you can get active, enjoy nature in your backyard in the city. I have one with me to show folks. So this is the one coming out next week. It's North County, which is actually where Kim lives. And on each card, you've got a full-size color photo. In the back, it has a ton of information, though it is short form content, to make it easy for you to just pick a card, any card, get outdoors, go, break out of routines, make connections to friends and family, and just, create memories that last a lifetime. So as I'll tell you later, the Go Deck was really critical for me in my mental health during a difficult time. And we'll talk more about that. But before I go any further, Kim, can you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Deanna, for hosting this event, and thank you to the Go Deck. We are kicking off Mental Health Awareness Month. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and there will be many events probably throughout wherever your city is for nonprofits that are mental health driven. If you want to join a training or get some more information, we'll talk about some resources later. A little bit about me. After graduating UC Santa Barbara, I spent some time in the business world. And then after that, I moved into music production and performance. My husband and I started a company called the Exceptional Music Company, and we stage different bands, named acts, and we've put on concerts and festivals throughout Southern California and in other areas when needed. We also focus a lot on nonprofit organizations doing their charity galas because that's really important to us. I also spent much of my time lead singing for an 80s cover band, which Deanna has seen before, called the Pop Rocks. That was very exciting for me because that's my kind of music. In the recent years, I've become a mental health advocate, and it's been a very important cause of my life, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I spent 10 years on the board for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in San Diego, where I was also the Education and Program Services Committee Chair, which basically meant that I arranged for different programs and education services for different schools or community venues or workplaces. And I spent much of my time in the classroom presenting to kids and teachers and parents about the signs of mental illness and how to seek help.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. And what some folks may not know is that I met Kim over 12 years ago, cycling. We both took a class at the San Diego Velodrome. If you're not familiar with the Velodrome, it's a bicycle track. It's in the Morley Field section of Balboa Park, and it's actually racing season. So if you popped over there on a Tuesday or Friday, you would get to watch free racing. There's no charge to enter. It's really exciting and fun. It's even great for kids. They find it very exciting to watch the cyclists, speeding around the track. And that's where we met. And I would say before cycling, even though San Diego is beautiful, obviously I've showcased it in the Go Deck, I didn't particularly love it here. It's because I didn't have friends. All my family's on the East Coast, but cycling gave me friends and a new family essentially, and this community. And I pretty much, Kim, you can attest, we cycled all time, whenever we could do it, we were cycling. Always. And, so when the pandemic hit in March 2020, it was really shocking to me to be disconnected from all the people that I would, see every weekend or even during the week. And people were still writing a little bit, but it really came to a halt. And so my social outlet had been taken away. It was just a very disruptive time for everyone. And that's when I started, thinking, what else can I do to, get through, I guess you could say, a dark, difficult period. And that's when I started walking more. I guess you could call it hiking or walking, just outdoors, seeing new places. And it was transformative in the sense that I got through that time. I my spirit was always, I felt it was lifted after going outdoors. And sometimes it's someone across the street waving, even though you would almost like, you'd see someone coming, so you'd cross the street to get away from them. But the fact that they would wave, that was really helpful. And that's also what sparked the idea for the Go Deck. I thought, wow, we have so many places that I failed to explore, by foot mainly. And I want to showcase those somehow. And so, Kim, I want to ask you, what is it about getting outdoors that lifted my spirit? Or, I'm sure it does it for other people, not just me. Can you tell me more about that? And then also maybe some other ways that if someone is going through a difficult time, other ways to potentially lift their spirits.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's fantastic. Going out into nature or doing anything to help the brain. Sometimes it's a very good way of doing it. I kind of think of it as like something like called move your muscles, move your thoughts. So often when we're struggling, for instance, we usually stay indoors or stay in a safe spot, maybe our bed or on the couch. And it sometimes feels very scary to even move from that because we're struggling with such deep depression or anxiety. It feels a bit paralyzing. So I like to think of move your muscles, move your thoughts. It could be anything, right? I mean, it could just be literally going outside and stepping into the sunshine for a minute. And I like to tell people that you don't have to do anything huge. You can just step outside for a minute, see how it feels for like 3 minutes. If 3 minutes feels good, then maybe 2 more minutes. And if that feels great, then a few more minutes. If it doesn't, then that's okay. You did something today, and then you can go back inside and try again tomorrow. But what you did is you basically transformed. We were inside during the pandemic, right? So many of us we were inside. So stepping outside into the sunlight, moving those muscles distracts you from what you're thinking about in the moment because it changes your environment. And the other thing to keep in mind is that vitamin D that we get from sunlight actually plays a role in our mental health. And it plays a role by regulating the neurotransmitters in our brain, like serotonin or dopamine. So that's why sometimes we feel right good out in the sunlight. And that's why sometimes you hear about people who are living in areas that don't have a lot of sunlight, where they get dark very quickly during the day, where they have these literally they have like these seasonal affect disorder lights, which literally feed them sunlight. And it does really help with that. So I think it's really important to think about getting outside, even if like for you, taking a walk, waving to other people, listening to music, just sitting somewhere. If you don't feel like moving, you're actually, stimulating your brain to think about things. And you also brought up the Go Deck. I mean, that's a good idea. Sometimes you might say, I just don't know what I want to do. I'm really struggling. I can't make any decisions. I just don't even know what I'm going to do. So, I mean, you could just pull a card and you could say, can I do this today? Should I just try today? That's one way to also, try to change your thoughts as well. But I think in terms of things that can help us during struggling times, reaching out to friends, whether it's via text or even a phone call. Sometimes when we're struggling, we can't even imagine getting on the phone and having a conversation. I know that people were reaching out to me when I was struggling. Sometimes I wouldn't respond, or sometimes I would just respond with can't talk, but you're reaching out. Good sleep habits. So often we stay up late or we don't get enough sleep. That does contribute to our anxiety and our depression sometimes. Good nutrition, feeding your body. That's very important for your brain health as well. And then also talking to someone that you trust, someone that you feel safe with, or if you feel like you're really struggling and need someone to talk to, being open to reaching out to a mental health professional. And I just want to add, when you're talking about the pandemic, I too was struggling with I wanted to focus on something. And, there was a bike event that I wanted to do that was canceled because of the pandemic. So I was processing this idea of doing this cycling challenge, which we'll talk about a little bit later, called the Everest Challenge. And in doing so, I wanted to connect it to something that was important for me because so many of us were struggling. So I decided to do this climbing my Everest or my Everest challenge,
Yeah.
and raise money for suicide prevention. And then that someone said to me, why don't you document it? So we documented it, and we created a short documentary called Climbing My Everest, which talks about my struggle with mental illness. And I'm very proud to say that it won a film festival award and a Telly Award, but we'll get into that and what that really means in terms of mental health later. But it's just doing anything to help yourself in a situation that could just be a small thing.
Yeah. And Kim, you mentioned reaching out to people.
Mhm.
You know, I think sometimes when I'm struggling, like you said, I don't want to talk.
Mhm.
Maybe I want to be by myself. You know, maybe because I have negative thoughts. And
Sure.
how, for, you know, I think sometimes because it's like you're telepathic or something, you just know these things. You would reach out to me and send me messages. Can you, for people who want to be able to reach out to people if they think they might be
Mm.
struggling, you know, maybe they haven't heard from them in a while and you're just curious, how are they doing? You're a little worried maybe. What kind of text messages would you suggest to open the door for conversation?
Sure. I mean, sometimes we feel intuitively that someone we care about is struggling, whether we feel on a one sensitive level. I feel like that's kind of how I'm wired. But
Yeah.
sometimes there's things that we might notice in someone, right? Like things that are different, they're behaving differently. You might see that, you haven't heard from someone in a while and they've been really active with you via text message or phone calls, or maybe even on social media. So many of us,
Yeah.
sometimes we post on social media, sometimes we check in on social media to see how our friends are doing, but they haven't posted and they're usually a poster. Or you sense that, you've seen them in person and they've been really, sad for more than
Mhm.
maybe a couple of weeks, because we all have down days, right?
Yeah.
We all have blue days. It doesn't mean that we're depressed, but if you notice that someone's persistently sad, or you're noticing that they've lost interest in things that they normally really enjoy, and they're not taking, an active role in that, or maybe you've noticed that they have changes in their sleep patterns, whether they're sleeping too much or they're not sleeping enough, or even perhaps they're irritable. Sometimes
Mhm.
people show signs of irritability, or they might show signs that they're feeling hopeless or feel like a burden. And those are the things that you might want to look for. Those are some signs. But also to keep in mind that it can look different for everybody. But if
Mhm.
you are concerned about someone, the best thing to do is to trust your gut
Mhm.
and think that you're going to be the only one that's going to reach out to them in that moment. Don't assume that someone else is going to do. And don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing, because just the fact that you cared can make them feel like, wow, they care about me in this moment that I don't really care about myself too much. So send them a text message. Hey, I've been thinking about you. We haven't really connected in a while. I just want to see how you're doing today.
Mhm.
And you use that word today. Use it in the present tense. Don't say, how are you doing? Because so often when people ask us, how are you doing? We're like, fine,
Yeah.
good.
And it's almost
And
like
if you're asked
we
someone,
ask that question sometimes not truly wanting an answer. You know,
right,
sometimes you pass them and say, how's it going? And you kind of just
right,
want to keep walking. So I like this. How are you doing today?
right,
It
right,
it shows you
exactly.
really want to hear and you want to know. And also it just every day is different sometimes.
Every day is different. And if you know that someone's struggling and you know that they've been depressed, even just saying, how are you doing in this moment?
Yeah.
Because the day can seem very large. Or you can just say, if someone is not responding to you, try again tomorrow and be like, hey, you may not feel like talking, but can you at least just check in with me with one word?
Mm.
That's fine. The other thing is, ask someone if they want to do something with you. Invite them in. It doesn't have to be something big. You can ask for them to introduce an activity like, hey, I just want to spend some time with you, any ideas? Or you could say, do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to grab coffee? Or
Mm.
say, hey, I'm really concerned about you. You're not engaging with me. I'm happy if you can. I'm happy to
Yeah.
just come over and sit with you. We don't even have to talk.
Mm.
But you also, if you're talking to someone in person, right? If you see someone in person, make sure that you talk to them in private when someone else isn't around, and just say, hey, I noticed that you haven't been quite yourself lately, and I want to make sure that you're okay. Can you tell me how you're doing? And don't be afraid.
Yeah. That's
Hmm.
really helpful because for me, just having a script, so to speak, or
Right.
a starting point is so helpful. Because I think I get paralyzed with not knowing what to say.
Sure.
So I don't say anything.
Right.
And then later you say, gosh, I wish I had reached out. There's that feeling of regret. Going back to the pandemic, I do feel like it was there was a change during that time in terms of people feeling a bit more comfortable. Of course, this is my experience, and other people have different. But I noticed more people saying, I'm having a tough day.
Sure.
Or, I'm not feeling so great today. People feeling more comfortable sharing that with other people versus, kind of burying it down. But, that's not always been the case. Sometimes you would say, I'm having a tough day, and someone would say, well, just go pick yourself up and, smile and you'll feel better, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of, at least there has been and probably continues to be, but maybe I don't experience it as much anymore, of misconceptions around mental health. What do you see as some of the most common misconceptions?
Well, there's quite a few, and I appreciate you saying that. And I want to go back to what you said about the pandemic too, and people might have been more vocal about it. And I think maybe that's because all of us were in the same boat.
It was a shared experience.
It was a shared experience. So people felt comfortable, like automatically we knew what you were feeling, even though it was a different experience for each of us, right? Everybody related to it. Like some of us who are more introverted people, I'm very extroverted on the outside, but I rejuvenate internally and I like to be alone. For some of us, it was like, wow, we can actually say, I can stay at home. I don't have to say yes to going out. But like my husband was like, I got to get out of the house, right? So everybody's different, but we had this shared bubble of we're all in this together. So that's maybe one thing too. Misconceptions, there are some people may not know this, but 1 in 4 of us will have a diagnosable mental health condition sometime in our lifetime. And in any slice in time, 1 in 5 of us will experience the signs of a mental health condition or symptoms of a mental health condition, excuse me. So a misconception that a mental health condition is a choice or a failure on our part, right? You just said, get over it. This misconception that you can just snap out of it or just get over it. And I think that, for people who are really experiencing that, they already feel guilty for feeling depressed, right? So when they hear that in their heads, they're like, I know I shouldn't feel this way, and people are pointing out the good things in their life, but they feel this way anyway. So inadvertently, we're making them feel worse without recognizing it. It's not because we're bad people. We don't intend to hurt our loved ones, but because we just don't know how to speak about it, right? So I think it makes, it's like telling someone who has cancer or diabetes to just get over it, just snap out of it. I mean, can't you just fix it? You can't, because mental illness is like, mental health is physical health. The brain is an organ. And we have to remember that. So, you wouldn't tell someone, that's having a heart attack in that moment to just start eating better and exercising. We know that that plays a part in it. But if someone's in a mental health crisis, that's not the time to do it, right? It's to relate to them that we're here for you. And that leads to stigma for help seeking. Because people feel like, well, maybe I am weak. Maybe I am just a failure. And, they think also that people also think that depression looks a certain way. And I think that's very important because I ask the kids in school, what do you think depression looks like? And sometimes they say, well, the person looks sad or the person, isn't smiling or they're frowning. And then sometimes someone will say it looks like someone's normal, right? People say to me often, I'm very surprised to know that you have, chronic depression, that you're living with mental illness. I said, I am. I can have a fully functioning life because I've learned to manage it. Some days are difficult, but it doesn't look like you automatically know sometimes someone might be struggling. So that's why it's important to keep that dialogue open, right? The other misconception is
it
that
reminds me of when Robin Williams, the comedian, passed. There was a lot of people who were so surprised. So it really goes to show that depression has many faces. It looks different for everyone. And I just want to let the folks on the call know, if you have
Oh,
any
yeah.
questions, feel free to pop them in. And of course, if you have a question you'd like to ask privately, you can send Kim or I a message on here as well.
Yeah.
Go
We
ahead,
invite
Kim.
questions. We want to make
Yeah.
this interactive if you guys have any questions for us. You know, bringing that topic up about Robin Williams, because that hits so many of us so deeply. I just want to add one thing to that, is that Robin Williams also had a debilitating health illness, physical health illness. So that's important to remember too, because often when people think of suicide, they think of a life event that happens to someone, like a major illness or a financial loss or a divorce or a loss in the family, and they see that life event and they assume that that person died by suicide because of that, but it's never the full story. Suicide happens when converging factors combine. So he had a genetic disposition to depression already, right? Possibly, you know, and then he had this happen. So it was a culmination of that. So I just wanted to add that as well, because I think it's an important distinction. But I think, you know, another thing that people think is if you have depression, you're always going to have it. And that's not necessarily true. Some of us go through a situation where we have depression for a short amount of time, and perhaps we find the right treatment for us. We see a mental health professional, or we get on some medication, and that helps us. And then we don't necessarily need to be on that medication long term. For some of us, we might need to be. So it looks different for everybody. I think that's important too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
I mentioned earlier about, I was during when the pandemic hit, after, I guess it was like after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5, and I thought, oh my gosh, when am I going to, hug someone again?
yeah.
Besides, like an adult, when am I going to have a coffee with a friend? And, so I talked about getting outdoors, and you shared some other, tips. But what about, when the situation is serious, someone needs help urgently, they're in a crisis, what kind of resources can you share with us, when the situation is very serious, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
need help immediately?
Sure. That's very important. We'll talk about crisis. Absolutely. I want to also say, when you said about the hugs, physical contact was so important for so many of us. I don't think many of us really understood that, right? And I couldn't wait to hug people. I just couldn't wait to just touch, and I think also, with the masks, we communicate through facial expressions. My face is very expressive, and you see eyes, and it's very expressive too. You can express with your eyes, but so much, people wanted to see a smile. People wanted connection. So we were all struggling on some level, whether we knew it or not. But let's talk about a situation that we call a crisis. So let's talk about someone that you really notice is struggling, where we gave you some warning signs where it's been, a few weeks of them, not getting out of bed, or you notice really that they're starting to give away maybe their prized possessions. That's a red flag, because often people who are thinking about suicide start to give away things that they think they don't need anymore. So I want to talk about, before I talk about resources, how to talk to someone that you think might be thinking of suicide. So many of us say, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, it goes back to the same way we talked about someone that's struggling with depression. You talk to them in private. Hey, I've been noticing about this, and I'm really worried about you. You don't seem like yourself lately. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And don't be afraid to use those words, because people sometimes think, oh my gosh, if I say that, am I going to put that into their head? No, it's much better to say it out loud to them. And it's very important to know that we are so worried that we might say the wrong thing, but don't trust your gut. That person needs a friend in that moment, because they're not necessarily thinking clearly. And if you also know that someone is thinking about suicide, ask them if they have a plan of how they think they would do it. Because if they have a plan, it's very, very important that moment to separate time, the time that they're in crisis, and the distance from the way of killing themselves. So we need to get them to help. If a suicide attempt is in progress, you want to, call 911, very important. So some of the things that we can do for resources. Well, the 988 number, okay? That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. We have a three-digit code now, right? So 988, just like 911, but you call 988. It will route you to the crisis line that's closest in your area code, and you will be talking to a trained volunteer who can talk to you anonymously. They're there 24/7. It's free of charge, and they are really wonderful people. I will let you know that I had to call that number recently with a friend of mine, and in real time, we got help for her. And that's really important to know, that I'm not just saying just call that number.
Mhm.
I called for someone. You know, I could have called for myself as well, but they're there to help you. And the wait time for us was not long at all. You don't have to be anonymous, but you can choose to be. If you don't want to pick up the phone, you can text to 741-741. We use the word text talk. You can text home, the word home, pretty much any word you say, but 741-741. Sometimes we feel better texting, right? I don't want to talk on the phone with someone, but you have a trained professional on the line with you, to a trained volunteer who's very versed in talking about crisis. So don't be afraid to do that as well. And we're going to list these resources as well in the chat box as time goes on. But also, if there's a youth that is maybe LGBTQIA that's struggling with any mental health issues, the Trevor Project is a wonderful organization that helps youth with mental health issues around sexuality. Also, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, is a great organization that has resources for people that are struggling, also support groups for those that are supporting loved ones. And we haven't talked much about that, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about climbing my Everest. But we really need to recognize too that it's not just the person that's struggling who's in pain. It's also the loved ones who are trying to help that person, right? I mean, I know that you would feel that way. If you noticed that I was struggling, it would really hurt you too, right?
Yeah.
You would feel
Yeah.
you want to help that person. So we want to recognize that those people are struggling as well. And I think also the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is another resource. And I also want to point out the Go Deck is a fantastic resource too,
Yeah.
if people aren't in crisis. But it's a really a great
Oh,
resource for
show
people to.
it
Yeah,
again.
I know. But I mean, it's a very serious. It's a great resource for people that are struggling with mental illness. I think because they can be really down. You can just, like I said, you have an idea, you don't know what you want to do, just try something different. But the crisis line is really the go-to, I think, if someone is in crisis in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you talking about, I don't want to call it the caregiver, because I've been on some calls about elderly care. So they call it caregivers, and I guess the overwhelm that you can feel sometimes. Because a lot of caregivers, I think, are probably also holding down a full-time job, or younger family, and now they got older families. So I think, yeah. And I think also there's some level of guilt for the family member who, or if you're like working with a coworker, you think, why can't I help them? What's wrong with me that I can't support someone? So important. You mentioned NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I looked at their website, and their theme for this month is "There's strength in every story." And I thought, how appropriate, because you're telling your story through climbing my Everest. So tell us a little bit more about this, because I personally, I love hearing stories and connecting with stories.
Yeah.
So tell us more about climbing my Everest.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I am the face of mental illness, and I'm the face of suicide risk. I am a suicide attempt survivor, and I'm very open about talking about my story, because my goal is to be able to help others realize that there is hope, even when you think that there is zero. As I mentioned, cycling became, well, Deanna and I met through cycling. And the way that I was introduced to cycling is from my brother. And my brother knew that I was struggling with depression, and I was really trying to find a passion in life. And, one day he invited me to go on a bike ride, and I mean, invited me several times, and I probably said no many times. But one day I had enough energy and I said, yeah, you know. And so he took me on this bike ride, and it probably changed my life. And the film talks about that moment where I said yes to going up a hill when I could have said no, let's go back. And what cycling did for me was it became a tool for managing my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized that I had been dealing with depression the majority of my life. I felt that I could be in a room full of others and felt completely alone, like I just didn't belong. And it started at a very young age, but it was off and on for quite a while. My parents didn't really know at the time, but it really came out in my late teens, early 20s. And so through trying to manage it with medication and many different things, um, you know, I struggled so badly, things got so difficult for me that I attempted to take my life. And after that suicide attempt, I think it's very important to recognize that people think, oh, if someone survives a suicide attempt, then things just get better. But actually, they got the worst they ever did for me. And it was just the start of a very difficult journey. So what climbing my Everest did for me, well, the Everest Challenge did for me is, like I said, I wanted to apply it to something important. And I knew that if I was raising money for a nonprofit, that it would give me more drive to complete it.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things about me is I don't like to disappoint people, which was what so was difficult for me with my depression, was that I felt like I was a huge burden, that I was making everybody's lives worse. My parents, my husband, my friends, that they would be better off without me. And in that moment, that's what I really thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really the case. And we talk about that in the film. So we decided to document the film to, talk about the journey. And it also talks about the journey of the loved ones, and how difficult it was for my husband to be by my side and see this, and also have to make some decisions that were very difficult for him for my care. But what I ended up finding was a way to manage my mental health. And one of those ways was through cycling. So the Climbing My Everest talks about my journey through mental illness through the eyes of my family and my friends. And like I said, it's a short documentary. It was a metaphor, for the journey of mental illness. And so the Everest challenge in itself is that you pick a hill and you ride up and down it as many times as it takes to reach the height of Mount Everest. So in this case, it was 56 times up and down a hill, but I did 58 because I'm an overachiever. When we raised over $30,000 for suicide prevention. But the metaphor was that, it was hard and it was painful and it required endurance, much like someone living with depression or suicidality. And it required endurance. Like I said, you just keep going. And sometimes it's very hard for people to recognize that you have to keep going. And I want people to understand that even if one thing doesn't work, it doesn't mean that something else won't.
Yeah.
And, I've tried many different things, and it's important to know that there is hope, there's light, and it can get better. Yeah. Yeah. So we have a feature film in the works. I'm really excited about that. I've been working on that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're, in addition to working on that, you still do presentations at schools. You could do corporate presentations.
Yeah.
Tell me more about
Yeah, I mean,
speaking.
so I still volunteer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I still do their programs, their evidence-based trainings for kids or parents or workplaces. Happy to do that. But also, my husband and I began doing speeches and presentations to communities, nonprofits, or any kind of organizations based upon our journey together. Someone living with mental illness and someone loving someone who has mental illness. And, it's a very interesting journey. I mean, my husband was someone who didn't understand mental illness back when we got together, and he inadvertently said all the wrong things, and he will tell you that. And, he would sit at the edge of the bed and just tell me to get up and do something that, what are you so depressed about? And basically snap out of it. But through this journey with me, he became an amazing mental health advocate. So
Yeah.
now what we do is we go and we talk about our journey together. We talk about the film, and the feature is going to, again, talk about the journey of someone living with mental illness and really explore how it affects those around you as well, and to help people recognize ways to seek help, things to help themselves. But we came across this idea that that there's a way to manage it, and then we call it the 4 Ps. It's
Okay.
partner, passenger, and purpose, and passion. And it's we try to talk about how you can live a very fulfilled life and do the things that you want to do in your life, and still, not, you can have your label because it's part of who you are, but it's not defining you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's always, what I find interesting is, you talk about people sometimes saying the wrong thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes people would say, well, Kim is so beautiful. How could she be, depressed? She's got every, looks and, love and all this stuff in the world. And I also think about when I hear these stories about other entrepreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
and they say your business is thriving and you've got it all. Like, why are you depressed? And yeah, we don't know what's going on for them. Yeah. And so I think it's interesting that we try to not look at look at those things.
I mean,
Anyway,
no,
blabbing about it still.
I think you raise a good point, because, when you said those things to me, it feels so uncomfortable for me to hear that, because I don't see myself that way.
Yeah.
And my husband used to call it this leaky bucket syndrome, where he would pay me a compliment and it would just sit here for a second and would leak out of my bucket of self-esteem. And so sometimes when we're talking to people that have, how can they have that? That's not what they see, how they see themselves.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
some of that inner work that I've been doing over the years is to, to learn to love myself and to connect with myself. And one thing that we talk about in the movie, and I think it's a really, the thing we talk about, the 4 Ps, the first thing is partner. And
Mm-hmm.
after many years of me trying to find the answers from doctors and trying all these different medications, one day I said to myself, why am I looking for others to fix me? And it wasn't that I didn't need the help from those people, but it also was saying to myself that I needed to show up for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was time for Kim to show up for herself, or the writing was on the wall. And I specifically remember myself like looking in the mirror one day, and this was probably in about 2011 or 12. And I remember looking in the mirror and looking at myself and saying, like like a conversation with, like, myself, but I said, Kim, we've got to find a way to get along here, because you're all I've got and you're all I've got, and I'm all you've got. Like, and so, because I felt like we were battling each other.
Yeah.
And I said, we have to find a way to get along, because we're inside each other. And that was a big day. And one day, instead of trying to push my mental illness away, I decided to invite it in as a partner. And the day that I said that it was part of who I was the day that a huge weight was lifted off of my shoulders. And instead of, sometimes we have such little energy when we're struggling with depression or anxiety, that trying to run away from it takes that very little energy that there is. So if you can partner with it, it really changes the mindset of how you look at it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I guess,
Yes.
self-compassion, and I think that's great, because I think at some point all of us will have a day when we're feeling blue, or it's a darker day, or even a difficult week or period, and just saying it's okay, like, being compassionate for yourself, to say it's okay to not be smiling all the time,
Yes.
or to be cheerful. Yeah, because I think there's so much pressure to be happy, especially I think more and more with social media, because
Yes.
people post a lot of pictures of smiling, posting pictures of a really happy life, uh, also just, posting pictures that present a certain view that you want to
Yes,
project. And
absolutely.
when you don't maybe see that yourself, when you look in the mirror, how you feel,
Yes,
you
right.
really yourself. Yeah.
Or you see that on other people, and you see
Yeah.
you and that perception of like their life is amazing, oh my gosh, and look at my life. And that's the difficulty with social media,
Mhm.
because it's not necessarily reality, but perception is reality
Mhm.
no matter how you look at it. My perception is my reality. So I've always been trying to be very, very transparent and vulnerable to some degree on social media, because I feel like I want people to recognize that that's not the whole story. And it's hard to put yourself out there sometimes. And sometimes I'm better at just posting my dogs, but I
Yeah.
want people to realize that it's never the full story. And it's really hard not to compare yourself to others,
Yeah.
but we're not living any other person's life. And remember that what you're seeing is a snippet, just a tiny little snippet of a view of someone's life. And I want to invite people to recognize those signs in themselves. If you're being activated by something on social media,
Mhm.
give yourself that grace and take a step back. You know, you can, give yourself a moment to log off of it, maybe watch something else on TV that's, calming. And we're so often we're watching TV and then we go back to our phones, and I'm guilty of it. But I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important to do that. And it's an interesting concept. I mean, I have to remind myself too, because I talk about my mental illness as a passenger in my car,
Yeah.
and this car that I'm driving, and I'm going to be driving it the majority of the time, but sometimes my depression's going to climb out of that back seat and grab that wheel. But I know now that I'm going to be driving it the majority of the time. So I remind myself that when my depression visits me, like you just said, compassion,
Mhm.
self-grace, like it's okay. I know it's going to get better. It's okay not to be okay, like you just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's funny you mentioned that you feel more comfortable posting about your dogs. Like,
Mm,
I feel making videos about the Go Deck and
yeah.
about, getting outdoors and stuff, that feels more comfortable. But to start doing these Instagram lives where I share people a little bit more, like why I created the Go Deck and
Yes.
why I keep, pushing for the business to succeed, because it was getting outdoors was so helpful for me. And
Yes.
also I've just enjoyed, having this extra tool in my pocket to get outdoors with,
Exactly.
my daughter, my husband, and my
Yes.
family. So I'm trying to share more about me with, a
Yeah.
more authentic self
And
versus
if
just posting the products and saying go buy
yeah.
it.
No, I mean, if you'll allow me to say something, I mean, beautiful about you,
Yeah.
I have seen this beautiful growth with you as a person in terms of your openness and your ability to really connect on this emotional level, that you've invited the conversation in to talk about it. I've been very proud of you, how you've really gotten more heart-centered and really touched, inside with yourself too. And I want to say that what you created with the Go Deck is something I admire so very much, because what you did is you took a very difficult situation, and during the pandemic you decided, I'm going to try these things to see how it works for me, and you took it upon yourself to change your thoughts by moving your body. And then what you then did was went outside, you found things to do, you created different things. So it wasn't the same thing all the time, different places to go, whether it was a park, whether it was a hike, whether it was an experience. And you did that for yourself, and you did it for Leah because it was such a difficult time. And then you created this amazing product to share with others because you wanted to share that I knew that I was struggling. You were that aware of it, that I'm struggling. Therefore, if I knew this helped me, why don't I try to help someone else? So you did exactly what we're talking about in this. I mean, you are the example of mental health difference and cognitive behavioral therapy in the making, and, and doing self-care, everything about it. I mean, I'm so fond of, how many Go decks have I bought now? And now you got
You're
North
one
County.
of my biggest customers.
I know, because I share it with everybody and the grandkids in London when they come to visit. It's a great tool. We talk about self-care. This is how you take care of yourself. It's important.
Thank you.
Yeah, self-care.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah,
And thanks to everybody who joined. If you do have a question, you can pop it
please.
in. And like we said earlier, if you want to have a private question, you can always just send a message to either of us.
Are you
Kim,
are you posting the resources on the chat, or I would love to share the video?
So I put the resources in the original post in the comments.
Okay, great.
And then I post a recording of this as well.
Yes.
And we'll post the resources again. And then also this will all be posted on my other socials, on Facebook, on YouTube. It'll go on a new website that's launching next week. So we are going to blast it out and make sure people have these resources. You never know. There might be a moment when someone's saying, like, I'm feeling down today, and there was that Instagram live with Deanna and Kim, and I know they posted it, and they'll find it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You may not have anybody in your life right now who may need this, but it could be down the road, and it could be a stranger. I've come across people that are strangers that need just a little bit of a little bit of someone who just shows some kind of care and compassion. So I invite you all to, look at the Climbing My Everest short documentary. Please, if you want to ask me something offline or Deanna offline, and remember to take care of yourself during difficult times and take care of your nutrition and your sleep. And Mental Health Awareness Month is a very great time to start self-caring. Yeah.
And I tell you that if you're in San Diego, the weather is amazing right now, so you can get outdoors so easily.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Deanna. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, for sharing the resources, your expertise, and telling your story as well.
Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. And if you're on the East Coast, good night. If you're on the West Coast, have a good dinner, a good wind down before the day concludes. Great. Thank you, Kim.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.